There we are. Liz McGowan, welcome to the listening. Good to see you.
Good to be here.
Yeah, we're both in Norfolk. Tell us briefly where you are. Which part of the county you're in?
We have a small holding just outside Aylsham. So we've got we're just surrounded by fields, intensively farmed fields. But we have about 3 acres, so including a little bit of woodland. So that's our space. Yeah. It's a good place to be, and an amazing place to be over the last year as well. Really good.
Yeah, we're very fortunate in that sense, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Out in the wilds. Well, not that wild, but you know what I mean.
Well, you're wilder than we are.
And
We're
are you enjoying this massive change? To just let everyone know, we had an incredible few days of balmy, sort of 20-degree sunshine, and then this morning a northeasterly's just blown in, and it's about 8 degrees outside. Although it feels colder, maybe the wind chill or just the shock, but it's a very different day today, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a northeasterly wind, and we're just on the top of a rise, so you really know it here when there's a northeasterly wind. Yeah, I loved it. There was a day, I think there was a day last month when it suddenly got warm, and you just noticed that physical change, like the body relaxing, and you suddenly realize that you've been kind of tensed up against the cold, like for months and months, and then so it's only when it goes that you suddenly think, oh yeah, this is what it used to be like. So yeah, that's always such a gift. Very lovely. Yeah,
I know exactly what you mean. I was really consciously experiencing that yesterday, and I have a routine of having a cold shower under the trees every morning, which I did all through the winter when the pipes weren't frozen, which wasn't often this year. But yesterday, for the first time, I actually had a second shower in the afternoon because I'd got so hot because I've been bringing back my firewood from the woods. And it was so lovely just being under the trees and being hot and being in the warm air.
yes.
And exactly that sense of just expanding back into the body after holding tight, and like you say, it's funny because at the start of the autumn, when it first gets a bit colder, it's so uncomfortable because we're not used to it. But I suppose we slowly kind of clench and harden up, and then by the end of the winter, you don't even realize that you've contracted in that way until, like you say, you get that wonderful just letting go of the tension.
And also like a sense of physical freedom from not having to carry the weight of the layers of clothes.
Yeah.
And the hat and the gloves, that sense of freedom and
openness, like the boundary between you and the world has kind of lessened.
Yeah.
I feel that sort of like I'm closer to the landscape. I'm more sort of blending with it, and it, sort of taking shoes off and being barefoot and really feeling. And the smells, there's a wonderful, I don't know what it's like where you are, but we get these really delicious smells in spring that come from the trees. I guess they're also, some of them starting to flower. Obviously there's flowers on the ground as well, but there's this sort of sweet smoky scent that permeates, and every now and again you'll get a different flavor. We have some poplars down at the bottom of the reserve, and they have such a kind of sweet musky smell, and every now and again, if the wind's in the right direction, that will come over. And it reaches a sort of peak probably in early May, where it's almost overwhelming. It almost sends me to sleep. If I go for a walk in the woods, it's kind of quite magical. You can imagine that you go for a walk and then you get overwhelmed by these scents, and then you fall asleep, and the fairies come out and something happens. It's really like that. it's just such a delicious, wholesome, green, fruity smell.
Have you found yourself in closer relationship with the woods over this last year? I was just thinking about this thing of how we've all had less human contact, and I just wondered if that has made room for a kind of more intense experience in the woods.
Well, it's interesting because I think I was already in lockdown in some senses, for the past 17 years. I'm not, I am quite a solitary soul by nature. So in that sense, and I'm not a great consumer, so I'm not one who's out shopping or doing that. So it didn't really, in that way, feel that different to me. And so because I'm already quite connected in with the land here, I didn't really notice a difference in that regard. It was more like a psychological sort of impact, or a sense of, well, there was some very kind of tangible effects, like the work I was doing was stopped immediately, and there was no because of just bad luck in terms of my self-employment for the last few years. The preceding year, I probably earned less money than I ever have self-employed. So I didn't get any help from the government either. So there was suddenly this kind of void financially. So all of that worry kind of impacted me, and the obvious effects of that. But there was also a sense of, because I don't have any particular fear of the virus, because I feel like we've greatly inflated what's actually going on, and it's more of a kind of psychological illness, a societal mental episode that's happened, well, and a global one. So it's more the feeling and the kind of unease of that, of seeing how fragile my culture is and how out of touch it is with reality. Those things have kind of disturbed me and affected me. So yeah, that's how it's been really for me. It's more like a worry, because I have children, and thinking, okay, we are, as we were just saying before we started the recording, there's no going back to what was happening before. The world has changed forever, and good, because the way we were before was terminal. And we're trying collectively, it seems, or at least on some levels, to get back to that, which is a terrible idea. It's impossible for a start, but it's a terrible idea, because this is the opportunity to look at how broken our way of life is, and how deadly it is, and very quickly it's going to kill us, and take most of the other species with it. So good that things have fucked up. Now let's actually do some serious kind of moving towards a different way of being. Yeah. And how about you? I mean, what was your kind of experience of this whole period from where you are?
Well, I think like you, it's certainly at the beginning there was a huge amount of anxiety about this for me, but almost immediately, and very much because of where I am and what I do, there was this sense of sort of expansion, I think, and I live with someone who's very kind of work driven, has a very strong work ethic, and suddenly all his work stopped, and so this, and there was that amazing weather, and so everything kind of, so this really extraordinary space opened up. I think a lot of people experienced this, and we were doing huge amounts in the garden, and we were making all these within this area that we had been confined to. We were making all these amazing discoveries, You know, we would walk out for the best part of the day with a sort of packet of sandwiches, which is something we never used to do from here. And we would make all these amazing discoveries, like 2 or 3 miles from home, you know, that we just, so all that was extraordinary. I think the other really interesting thing for me was in terms of my work that last summer was that, you know, my work is very much about the Norfolk East Anglian landscape, and I've pretty much all my life as an artist, I've worked in this area, shown in this area, done stuff in this area, with only 1 or 2 exceptions. I've been in East Anglia doing that stuff, and of course everything got cancelled. But I found myself. There was an organization that I knew of and liked in California, and I ended up being part of a sort of curated exhibition, online exhibition organized by them in California. And then later on, I also had something accepted for a nature art biennale in Korea.
Oh, wow.
And this is like the woman who never got out of Norfolk. You know, suddenly I was kind of, you know, and also at that time I was having, I was linking into some really interesting forums and conversations around land art, environmental art, whatever, you know, whatever you call it, and making these connections and having these conversations with people who I never would have generated those conversations with those people, you know. And so that was really great. You know, it was really good for me, I have to say. It was very good for me to do that. So yes, in many ways. And then I guess more recently, I suppose over the last year, I have had more intense time in the studio. It's as if I've landed more in the studio. And yes, and the other, I suppose the other thing, and again, the one that sort of relates to my work, is that drawing has never been a part of my practice. I haven't really sat and drawn something since I was doing O-level art, because I never went to art college. And sometime around the beginning of lockdown, I have 2 sisters, and because of things they were saying to me at that time, I offered them this idea that we would have an online drawing class. So we would meet on Skype and we'd have a drawing class. And so we met up that first time, and I sent them pads of paper and pencils, and we each had a lemon to draw. and we sat together and we drew this lemon. And we've actually been drawing. That started in early May, and we have actually been doing that every week without a break ever since.
Wow.
And we met we did that for an hour a week last year, and then at the beginning of this year we all decided it wasn't long enough. So now, so this year we've been doing a 2-hour session a week. And for all of last year, I couldn't see any relation in this to my practice at all. It was something that I really enjoyed doing, and I enjoyed that sense, because of course it's like a muscle, that, you know, that we could all see how we were improving, and it was very playful. We kind of made it up as we went along, really. So all my drawing stuff was in the house, and then my work was was in the studio, in completely separate space. And sometime around the beginning of the year, maybe in February or something, I decided to draw my hand. And I did a couple of drawings. And the drawing I had done before I did my hand, I had picked some fallen ash branches, which had that beautiful lichen on it. Mm. And I brought them in, and I'd drawn them. And anyway, I did a couple of drawings of my hand, and this drawing was around, and I suddenly thought, what would happen if I drew lichen on my hand? Mm-hmm. So I did, and it kind of looked a bit, scrofulous, as you can imagine. It looked like some sort of ghastly, So then I thought, well, actually, I need to put real lichen on this drawing. So for the first time, I took a drawing to the studio and stuck lichen onto it. Mm. And that was the beginning of this process of this drawing slowly moving into the studio. And I think last week was the first time that I actually went to the studio on my own and drew on my own, because up until then, there's something very magical about drawing with other people. And and even online, even though it's online, there is this extraordinary atmosphere of focus and concentration when you're all drawing. It's a really wonderful thing, and I love that. And the other thing about drawing with them is that every time one of us gets fed up, we'll show each other what we're doing and have a little conversation about it. And then almost always out of that comes something, or you'll see something, or they'll say something, go, oh yeah, or they'll say, try this, and you try that, And so those drawings develop in a way, I think, certainly up until now, if I'd been doing them on my own, I'd have just given up, So in many ways, it's been a really interesting process. I can't remember why you asked me that question now, or how that came up.
Well, but so what immediately comes up for me when I hear you is, so what was going on within your relationship with say your two sisters? Is that what you said? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So did you, over that process of time and improving sort of ability of drawing or whatever, or deepening into the process, was something also happening in your relationship with your sisters? Were you actually connecting in a way, or how did that change your connection, or what was going on? Was it like a vehicle for something else as well, in terms of, where you all are in your lives at the moment and what was going on in the world, and this sense of family and being together and spending some real kind of very different time? Most people meet and they just chat and maybe don't even really listen to each other, but you were doing something very different. So was there kind of an exchange of energy, conversation, thoughts, feelings that was going on around the drawing that was kind of interesting or beautiful or whatever for you?
Yeah, so so we also have an older brother, but when we were growing up at home, there was very little connection between us. I would say that we were somehow very separate, and somehow, although we grew up in this big family, we all experienced in different ways a sort of sense of isolation, if you like. And when we left home, we all went off and did very different things. into very different worlds. And you know, we would meet up for Christmas, and you know, we would do all the family things, but there it was. And then when I was in my 30s with the young children, we, in a weird way, we all, again, in our own unique and very different ways, we all started to engage with some kind of form of therapeutic process. And it happened around the same time. And so we started talking. And that was really the beginning of something which is still going on now, if you like. And slowly, I guess you could say that we've each helped each other to unpack old stories. Having said that, I think at the time of lockdown, there would be phone conversations. I'd phone one and one would phone the other, kind of thing. And then what we'd try and do is once or twice a year, we'd try and have a weekend away together. And that was like our sort of time. And when lockdown happened, the first thing that we decided, or that was established, was that we would, because there was that sense of wanting to kind of check in with people, wasn't there, at the beginning? You know, you wanted to know that people were all right. And we started just like a weekly check-in. And it was out of that the drawing came, that offering of mine of drawing came. And so in some ways, it's quite difficult to disentangle one from the other, if you like, because the exchanges have been very, you know, those checking in times have been very intense. But there's something, but having said that, there is something really, you know, we'll have that quite intense time. And then there is this sort of activity where it's almost like, it's incredibly affirming. I think that's what I would say. It's been, I think for all of us, it's been on some level incredibly affirming for each other. And it's kind of, and also sort of opening up something, perhaps something playful, if you like, also, because it is very much about playing, but also affirming, because we can all see, especially over a year, you can see how each of us has just kind of almost sort of blossomed into this, you know. And there was an amazing moment at the beginning of the year when I guess because it was the beginning of the year, we were kind of reevaluating. It was at that time when we decided we needed 2 hours a week. But it was also the time at which we each, rather than just doing the same things, we each started, in a way, tailoring something. So one of my sisters went through a phase of doing kind of like just like abstract, just real abstract drawing, and it was fantastic for her, you know, and it was great to sort of witness, you know. And another sister sort of really got into the kind of, you know, the detail of plants. She's really getting into the detail of plants, for instance. So there is that sense of us all beginning to, can't think of the word, but you know, take it and apply it to something quite personal to us. This sort of newfound skill. It's very exciting. It's the highlight of my week, actually.
Yeah, so the sort of more individual expression is starting to come through now that you've gone through that process of
Yes.
Used to, and developing the skill of the drawing, and now the sort of more personal expression can kind of come out on the back of those kind of craft skills, if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, because it's interesting. The reason I ask is because it's often good to have other things going on, because it enables different forms of connection to happen. Because the usual verbal way of connecting to me seems like, in some ways, um, the least good, or the least effective way of connecting. Maybe that's the word. Because there's obviously all other kinds of connection goes on between people, energetic, or sensory or emotional. There's all kinds of unspoken things. Most of it's like an iceberg, right? The things we say are just a tiny bit of what's actually going on. So, and it's interesting to hear you talk about it, and as women as well, sharing this thing, because I've often had experiences with men where one of the best ways for men to be together is to do something together, like to make something, or there's that affirmation you talk about. There's such a sense of goodness and rightness and joy, and it's playful and it's fun, and there's a bit of sort of digging of each other and a bit of kind of celebrating, and all the things seem to be kind of rolled into it, and you're doing something and it's physical, and you're achieving something, and maybe hopefully it's something that kind of is going to serve people, or you're doing it maybe for one family or whatever it is. It really works in that way, and there's lots gets exchanged, which is really positive and healthy, and maybe it actually points to something that's largely absent from our way of life, which hopefully, something like this pandemic and all the other crises that are kind of unraveling right now, it's pointing to this thing of, that's who we are. We are these kind of social, tribal animals that get so much from being in connection with each other that isn't verbal, that isn't, commercial exchange. There's so much more that we need, that helps us thrive and feel great, and brings joy to life. And any of these techniques or things, situations that just kind of mean people can connect, sometimes unconsciously in different ways, I always feel there's a great benefit in them. So I kind of, I was, and perhaps because you've been connecting over the years already, it wasn't so noticeable. But I imagine if you hadn't been connecting and you suddenly started doing this process, it would have been a great way to sort of sneakily have a very profound connection. Because as you're describing it, I'm thinking, how can I do something like this with my two sisters? Because I don't really have much connection at all with my sisters. And a few years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I suggested this idea of like a monthly conversation, or more like a sort of listening or a way of counsel thing, where people could just sort of share. But I think they were terrified of the idea. I don't know what they thought was going to happen, but it scared the hell out of them, and they just didn't go for it. Because I've got this real sense of, like, I want to have some connection with them. And I don't want it just to be that superficial, how are you doing? Oh yeah, fine, great. That means nothing, that isn't true, and nobody's really sharing what's going on. I'd rather just check in once a month and have a real conversation, or just really be there in a very real way, so we can actually share something, not even trying to get anything out of it, just to show up as we are, and it be okay for us to just be who we are and be sort of witnessed by our siblings. So yeah, I wonder if maybe I need to be a bit more creative and come up with something that seems like something completely different, and it may, and is, but maybe underneath I can get some of what I'm desiring, which is a real connection. Yeah.
I think it's difficult to, I mean, it's not, it's, you know, it's a bit alien to the kind of accepted culture in some ways, I think, and I think it's quite I think it's quite frightening and challenging for a lot of people to open up. Yeah, you should try it.
Yeah, well, I think I'll think of something now that you've kind of reminded me of that. So yeah, I'm also sort of getting a sense of something else that I was feeling over lockdown, which was there was a kind of I had a general sense in terms of the people I was connecting with that there was a kind of rise in creativity or a sort of desire for, and I wonder, my feeling was, and even a sort of kind of increase in sort of maybe sexual desire, like a sort of almost like, you know, when you take a plant or a tree and you prune it really hard or it gets damaged or something, often it flowers like hell immediately, almost as like a response of like, oh my God, I'm about to die. So boom. And I almost feel like there's been a bit of that energy of like the threat that has been sensed has triggered some deep kind of creative impulses. And I know that it's certainly reminded me and brought me back to who I am and what deeply drives me. And I've had a kind of whole crisis of, well, what the fuck am I doing with my life now and in the world? And what am I going to do in this kind of what my friend Keith calls the third act of life, which is like the last part now, you know, because I'm just about to get to 50 and this is it. It's like the third act is just beginning. I better, you know, if not now, then it's not going to happen. So I've had a real sense, even though it's almost kind of counterintuitive because it, you know, the whole culture has been almost at war with anything creative because you can't do any of the creative things because the money isn't there and all of that is going on. But I almost feel like it's more important now to be expressing and sharing your creativity, especially if you're an artist. The culture needs it more than ever because as the old is dying and falling apart, it's going to be the creators and the creative in every person and the artist in every person that will show us and create the way through and the new way of living. So it feels to me like it's so important right now to make art and to put it out there and to involve people in it as well and try and, if you can, if you're in that position, facilitate in a way, which is what you did, other people accessing their creativity. And there's something so vital and right about that, I sense. So I don't know if that
my experience certainly at the beginning of lockdown was that many artists were completely paralyzed. There was a real, certainly in those early months, there was a real sense of people being paralyzed and in a way, you know, to some extent sort of in crisis. It's like, whoa, what, you know, what now, sort of thing. I think the next stage after that really was dialogue, was conversation, people reaching out and having conversations. And to begin with, it seemed like every time you saw an artist conversation, the first question would be, how have you been doing during lockdown? They'd all say, oh, you know, oh, I went into paralysis and couldn't make any work. It was almost like we had to get over that bit. But then I think, since then, I think that there's been some quite interesting conversation going on. And as I say, this extraordinary, I mean, I don't, you know, I live with Zoom because we have to, because we need to. But there's been this, you know, for instance, there's an organization in Devon called Art.Earth. And I had an exhibition with them a few years ago, and they have this thing called First Friday, which it used to be that people in the area would go to Dartington, because it was based at Dartington, and bring their lunch and bring some work, and they would have lunch and show their work to each other. And in lockdown, and I always thought, God, that would be such a nice thing to go to. And in lockdown, it went online. So then I was able to go to First Fridays every month and show people what I was doing and talk about what I was doing. And then it was like there were people from America and, you know, there was, you know, and Portugal and, you know, whatever, everyone was joining in. So there was that real sense of this, you know, and there are several instances of that, you know, of these these things which are just, I don't know. Cambridge Beekeeping did a talk about wax in the medieval world, and like, you know, their talks normally about 15 people come, and they did it online, and somebody shared it, and they had like 250 people from all over the world, and it was like they could completely freak them out, you know.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting. So there's been that yeah.
There has been a kind of international element to this whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely, there has. Yeah, and you know, one of my sisters has been doing some work on collective trauma, and that's a totally kind of I can't. The guy's based in some, you know, it's not in this country, and that's a totally global community that she's linked into there. So it's so I find that really interesting. And the other, I guess the other thing that it's thrown up for me, this business of Zoom and whatever, is I suppose two things really. What are the possibilities of communicating without being on Zoom? That's one thing. And the other thing is what can be communicated when you're on Zoom that isn't just the screen and the voice? Because it seems very clear to me that there's, like in our drawing classes, you know, none of us are, when we're deep in drawing, none of us are watching each other on the screen. The screen is there. If you look up, you can see your sister's drawing, but the atmosphere there is extraordinary. And so it has made me very interested in that. And as you say, you know, speaking is in many ways, I think, a relatively coarse way of communicating. And I think there are much finer ways of communicating. And so it does make me wonder about, I've been just really wondered about that and been really interested in that.
Yeah. There's the obvious kind of embodied communication going on, because this is something that I'm also fascinated by and have explored a little bit in this medium, as I've done conversations over quite a few years now in this way, but also noticing how feeling can be communicated, that words can kind of trigger things, but once you access a place and you're in your body, you're actually noticing yourself, you're aware of your emotions, you're aware of your physical sensations, then there starts to be this awareness of a conversation that's going on that is subverbal and that is a part of all of that. And I even wonder if there's a kind of quantum thing going on energetically that doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can actually access and communicate in a very direct physical way with people, you know, and start to uncover some sense of these feelings as you, like the muscle of drawing, as you start noticing what's going on. And I know you've done work around that relates to this, where you are starting to notice more, you know, what is actually going on, you know, what your actual experience of being is, and what happens in day-to-day activities and when you meet people, and how you start to become more and more aware of what other people are communicating when you meet them that's not verbal, there's a whole thing being communicated as soon as you meet somebody else, and often you can get more from that than anything they've said, or despite what they say, or in fact, you know, and more skillful people, and certainly kind of healers and practitioners who are very skilled in certain kind of techniques, can use language to just kind of occupy the mind of the person while they do the real work sort of beneath the surface, and you know, which is more energetic or physical or emotional. So this really does fascinate me, because there's so much going on in just our ordinary everyday experience that is outside the realm of the conscious mind. In fact, the conscious mind is the least of it, and in a way our culture is a sort of example of this, because we live in a culture of thought. And if you look at the results of that, we've kind of more and more, in fact, we've gone into our heads so much that we've actually gone out of our heads now, and we've got this virtual realm that's not even in our bodies, that we're kind of, or anywhere near them, you know, that's kind of pulled us out. And our culture is like that. And if you look at the disaster going on environmentally, it's because we've forgotten we are embodied, and we are part of a bigger body, which is the whole living biosphere. So it does.
Where do I end?
Yeah, exactly. And you realize once you start looking or feeling that there is no end. And that goes for, you know, so that there's that connection and communication with somebody else, that you're actually not separate, that they're just an extension of the thing that you are, you know.
That is everything.
Yes,
that
yes.
is everything.
Yeah.
I think somebody wrote, it was probably, I was on Instagram or something, and somebody said, you know, what if we are nature? and I just instantly wrote, we are nature.
Yeah. But the fact that we even have to ask, or that we have a word, this always fascinates me. But we have a word, nature, that's separate, you know.
But I think it's interesting, this thing about this this process of separation, of somehow setting up this kind of boundary between us and nature. You know, you don't realize how, or I didn't realize how profound it was until one day, you know, thinking about these things, I thought, you know, we talk now, we used to talk about kind of man-made and nature, you know, and then it wasn't possible anymore to say that nature was not man-made, because we've done so much. And then there was this thing about the human and the more than human, right? And which I really like. But then it's like one on from that, in a way, for me, is that it was one day I kind of looked around, you know, I can look around now, my living room, and say, and I can look at this computer and the screen and say, this is nature.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing in this computer that is not nature.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that is when you start to look at your laptop as nature, it's only then that you realize how utterly disconnected, how utterly disconnected we are. And it also I remember it partly came up in a project I did on beach plastic, and my kind of take on it was to make a plastic palace, and it was about plastic as treasure, because actually when I started to look into plastic, it was all about how it saves lives. You know, the stents that keep people alive are made of plastic. You know, the ropes that stop people falling off mountains are made of plastic. And I suddenly realized it wasn't like plastic is a terrible thing. It was the fact that we weren't treasuring it enough. You know, we buy it, we use it, we chuck it. It's not what it is, it's what we do with it in the interests of capitalism and mass consumption.
I mean, it's a process.
So
it's a spectrum, isn't it? I mean,
and you know, plastic again. Plastic is nature. It's all this kind of precious thing. But we by creating that divide, we forget the need for reciprocity. You know, we forget that nature just gives unconditionally, and we just take unconditionally on some level. I don't know. It's
even this kind of us and them thing, you know, like we, like mankind, whatever. That, you know, again, that's just that shows the culture of separateness, and it's, you know, I often think about this whole technological thing of it's just evolutionary kind of activity. It's like, yeah, maybe there is a kind of machine life form that's coming out of human activity that will maybe outlive humans. And why not? That's all completely natural too. You know, nuclear power is natural. Everything we have, everything we've created has come from nature, because it is, as you say, because we are inseparable. It's all an expression of life, you know, and it's the full spectrum. It can be toxic, it can be deadly, or it can be life-giving. It can do all of those things. And it's more about sort of balance and harmony, and when things get out of hand, they overwhelm, they destroy, and then they die and they get taken back again, and then something else comes along. It seems to be that's how we are, you know. That's, when I say we, I mean life. That's how the whole thing works.
That's how it works.
Yeah. And this sort of the arrogance of the idea of saving the earth or something, or that being your motto, you know, it's fucking outrageous. And it's absurd as well at the same time. Better for me, you know, because I've been on that journey too, of course, like many people, you know, trying to save the world or do good or whatever it was. But of course, ultimately you realize what I have to do is really do me the best I can, and show up in that, and be that expression of nature, you know, in its truth, and, you know, have the courage to be authentically who I am, even if it doesn't fit, maybe especially because it doesn't fit, whatever. I mean, just it's all about, I mean, it relates to me to that feeling you described when it got warmer. It's freedom. It's my sense of us being ourselves, and everything being what it actually is this freedom, this expansiveness, this just naturalness, you know. It's a simple
I think you're right. It's very, you know, I've just got kind of caught up in something there, but I think you're right. And you know, at a certain point you have to say, you have to say, if only for your own sanity, I think, I can't do anything about that. It's like I'm only me. I'm not some great whatever. This is me. But what I can do is be the best I can. Is actually, and ultimately that's all I can do. Ultimately,
it's so funny, isn't it, that it's simple, and all the world's traditions that have ever existed all say the same thing. They just say, just show up to actually what is, and do the right thing, be that true self you are, which is by nature good. It's so simple, and yet somehow it's the hardest thing. It's like we keep forgetting it, like, because we know it as little children. We know it, we're born with it, and then somehow, this is the fall, I guess, isn't it? Is somehow it gets, I don't know what happened. Life kind of knocks it out of us. We forget, and then we spend our lives trying to remember and get back to that place of just being with what is in nature and part of nature and inseparable. And like you're saying, everything is, the plastic is treasure. It's divine, like anything else. The whole thing is, it's astounding. It's amazing that it even exists. It's amazing that we have access to the consciousness of it, that we share in this consciousness that seems to be all there is, really, in actual fact. That kind of witness to everything that's going on, that we're feeling, that we're sensing. It's remarkable. And I guess a journey back to that joy of knowing that is certainly where I've been, or what I've been on, is finding a way home to that, the joy of just being alive. And what
I think there's I think on the other hand, what I can see is that as a collective, it is clear that we have unleashed a process of the kind that's never been unleashed by an animal on this planet before, and I think that is the struggle, in a sense, because I don't think because we have to, that this is the challenge, in the sense, like, we have to engage, we have to take on the fact that we are part of that. I am part of that. I am part of that process. I am complicit, if you like. And it's, I don't believe that the best thing for me to do is to retreat into my own little world, although that's kind of what I've had to do in this last year. So I have to engage. It's like my sense is that I have a responsibility, in a sense, to be in this world, and to be visible and active in whatever way I can in this world, and to take on that responsibility of being complicit in this what feels like at the moment a hugely destructive process.
Well, that's an extension of who you are, and when you're being authentic, fully authentic, it has that dimension of social responsibility. It has that understanding that every action you take is forming part of this whole collective impact that's happening. Everything you do is adding to this collective expression in the world. And yet still, I I think ultimately that is something the earth is expressing through us. I would argue that it's not something we're authoring, although we have influence. But that's not me saying to not take responsibility or to try and do something, because every impulse in me, and it's always been the way, has been to try and do some good, which inevitably has led me to be living in opposition to corporate profit or any of that stuff that kind of seems to be so damaging. And to me, that all just seems to stem from a collective expression of personal fear, of personal kind of imbalance, or sort of pathological conditions. These kind of energies in individuals seem to manifest when combined with certain ideas or technologies in some really kind of damaging things. It's the nature of life to try this stuff out, and there's a feedback loop going on, and we're part of this feedback loop. So the people who are psychopaths, who are just like attracted by the system to the top of the pyramid to run the corporation, they're no more responsible for what's going on than I am. It's just that they were formed in that way from whatever environmental conditions that made them be the person that got pulled into that thing. Now that thing itself, the entity of a corporation, is a kind of life form or expression of life on earth, and it utilizes humans. It utilizes the substrate of the living earth to become what it is, this weird energetic entity. And even though to my mind, to my small personal self, it's the enemy of all life, I can also see that it's an expression of life. And maybe it is a form of evolutionary life that will last beyond even biological life. I don't know, because maybe even biology itself is just a stage of this kind of unfolding of life. So I can always see like both sides. Do you see what I mean? I
do.
Yeah.
I suppose my thing on that in a way is that I think I'm the center of the universe. Most of the a lot of the time I act as if I am the center of the universe. And of course
you are. But you are. We all are.
Be careful. Be careful. I'm tiny. I'm dependent. As a race of beings, we are dependent on this tiny strip of earth and air that goes round the edge of this giant. We're not. It's just this tiny little zone, if you like, round the edge of the planet, and that's it. We got nowhere to go. That's the only place that we can exist. Our habitat is tiny, and we're and then you say, well, we're one planet in a solar system, which is a kind of fraction of the Milky Way or whatever, and in that sense, I look at all this kind of navel gazing, and I just think, it's we're part of something so infinite, like a system. We're part of a system that is so unimaginably huge that that how can we even begin to think that we have any sort of control. We can't.
No, exactly, we don't. I mean, the only sane response is the personal. with the consciousness of this connection to everything, is
Yeah.
that all I've got agency over is what I do physically, what I do in terms of interactions with other people, what I put out there in the world energetically, how I think, the story that I've created that I'm living by. These are the only things I've got any agency over. And even those are massively influenced. There's no real separation even in that. The more you look at it, right, you see that, well, I'm just a collection of voices like my parents, my grandparents, everyone I've ever met, every book I've ever read, and all of those things. And, and it changes all the time, every day, every bit of weather changes who I am. Everything I eat changes who I am. It's this, so these are all.
Is there something for you that sits beyond that, or below that, or deeper than that?
Yeah, there is, but I don't know what it is, or I feel it. I feel like it's probably what is witnessing my existence. That's what I feel. And, or that's the closest I can get to understanding what it might be, is this thing right now that's here witnessing what's going on, whatever that is. And I know that isn't me or Tim or this personality or this body or these feelings, because I've had enough experiences that have shown me that those are separate things. So yeah, and there's a massive consolation, if you like. I don't even think consolation is the right word. Just a sort of sense of peace in that, is that whatever happens, it doesn't matter because this is here anyway. So on one level, it's always this multi-level thing and a paradoxical thing that's going on, almost like a wave. That sort of idea of, is it a wave, is it a particle? It's kind of blinking in and out of existence all the time. Am I me, or is there just this consciousness? And I'm going backwards and forwards all the time. So there's this thing, I'm living in this body, I've got things to do, I've got children, I've got to do certain things so they can eat and live well and be happy, and I can, and I want to do things so that, this small self, this Tim person, can feel like he's doing something good in the world or fulfilling his potential or whatever it is. And yet also at the same time, there's just this massive sense of none of that matters at all. And there is just this kind of, this is what it is. And just the noticing of what it is is enough. So they're all stories. I feel like it's just story, and there are bad stories and good stories, and some days I'm telling a bad story, some days there's no story and I get a glimpse of what is, and that's great. Some days I'm meeting, in fact every time I meet someone else I realize it's just stories meeting, and sometimes the stories just can't mix, or one story is so locked into itself that nothing else can get in and it can't hear anything else. Or my story on that day is in such a bad state that I can't receive anything. It just, as we talk, you realize, or I'm realizing, that language is so inadequate to describe what's going on. But you have to do something, right? So if we because we live on this level, yeah, as well.
Yeah, we have to be.
Yeah, and
we have to be engaged. We are in this world, and we have to be engaged with it. And I think it's, but I think it's really interesting what you say about that kind of watcher, about the watcher. Because it that has a very different quality to it when one gets glimpses of that. That has a very, very different quality, I think. And I think it's I think the question for me is, can I inhabit both of those? interestingly, I think that the more I am able to inhabit this kind of daily in the world, physically, and the more that I can be in this, then the greater the potential there is that I can have some sense or connection with that watcher.
That's interesting. So by connecting more into that, you get back to that. Yeah, that's.
But you talk about. I mean, you talk about those feelings of being when you're really embodied. For instance, when you have that real sense of embodiment, I think that's often that it's often that at those moments that one is offered a glimpse of something else.
You know what? You're absolutely right, because that's how I first experienced it as a kid, was through my body, through my senses, and through the greater body of the earth, like through that blending my own physical sensations into the surrounding sensations of the landscape and the weather and the atmosphere and the sun, and it was those moments where everything dropped away and there was just this witness left, the watcher, and a kind of blissful sense of completeness, like there's nothing to do. And so it's interesting, because I was thinking, it's when I've noticed this part of me, the watcher, that I've accessed it. But I don't think it is. It's the other way around, because the actual watcher, there's nothing there. It's this strange paradox of it's seeing everything, but there's nothing. Which is, it's a mindfuck, but it's a wonderful feeling. Yeah. But this gets me. This lights me up, because this has been my learning from this time, this period I've been in the woods here, which was a retreat from the world, very much so, but has come to an end now. I'm kind of transitioning out of it now. And the one thing I've learned, which I call landing, which was from connection with the land and through the physical, is that is the most important thing to do, is to bring all these things into balance, but to be as connected as possible to the living land through my body, through my feelings, energetically, emotionally, even intellectually. So even the way I'm thinking or the stories I am telling, that they weave in a story about the place, that's an integral part, that's a foundational part of the story I'm living. And I feel like culturally, that's what we're looking for now. We're looking for a way to rebalance. We've done this massive push out through our minds and out. And I'm not saying that's altogether bad, but what's necessary now is that we balance all of that with the layers of emotion, body, greater body of the earth, and spirit, or the big thing, or the watcher, or whatever you want to call it. That we kind of, in ourselves and collectively, we find a way of harmonizing that. And that's been my lesson from this bizarre kind of extended midlife crisis that's lasted 17 years or something. But and kind of sharing that, I think, and bringing people to it, and I imagine there's something like that going on where you are, because I know you're doing things on the land and people are coming in and doing things. Is that just something about bringing people to connect with place, with themselves, with each other, that feels absolutely vital to me right now. There we are.
Yeah.
Is that us then? Or have you more?
Might be.
Well, as I always say, this is only part one. There can be others, We don't have to do it all now. Yeah.
Great.
I mean, there's a lot I'd like to talk to you, especially about the land, in terms of the whole journey of the artist and that way of being an artist in relationship and expression of the land and kind of the living landscape. That's something I would definitely like to talk more about. And yeah, maybe part two we can get into that more, because I'm quite intrigued by your journey as well as an artist and how you came to be working with the land. So yeah, let's do that if
Well,
you're.
I think that's a story for another time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or a set of stories for another time. Yeah.
Okay, Liz.
Great. Well, really, really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. See you soon.